Hey everyone, I'm Carolyn. Welcome back to another episode of As I See It. Got a little bit of a sore throat and a cough today, so hopefully I'll be able to get this done. I've been dying to do this video. I want to talk about the birth control myth. And I think I just made that up. I don't know if there is something called the birth control myth, but I'm going to explain what I mean by that here in a minute. But first I want to read a comment from someone on one of my recent videos. We should all be responsible for ourselves, this woman says. We have to in all aspects of our lives. Why not this? Women have choices. Abstinence. Yeah, because we all know abstinence works. We all know what the outcome could be, and that leads to birth control. If you're having sex, there are plenty of methods to prevent pregnancy. Or go get the morning after pill. There's always motherhood and there's always adoption. Too many women use abortion as birth control. There's so many things wrong with that statement. The idea that women use abortion as birth control is insulting to every single woman who's ever had an abortion. No one uses abortion as freaking birth control. That's a whole other video, and I think I'm gonna make that video soon because I've been wanting to talk about something along those lines. This video is about her other statements. Why don't you just go get birth control? You know, I mean, you're irresponsible. Why don't you just go get birth control? I'm gonna give you some facts today. I've got some data about birth control and why women don't just go get birth control. So let's get started. First of all, let me say this concept of, I don't even want to call it a concept. It's almost like a privilege. I don't even know what to call it. But this idea that, oh, just go get birth control. What a privileged life you must lead to think it's that easy for every woman in this country to just go get birth control. I, even as a white woman, have been challenged with getting birth control. But especially women of color, poor women. It's not that easy to just run right out and get birth control. And I'm going to talk about that. So let's talk about accessibility of birth control. More than 19 million women of reproductive age living in the U.S. are in need of publicly funded contraception and live in contraceptive deserts. I had to double check that number. 19 million women are in need of help paying for contraception, or they live in contraceptive deserts where it is extremely challenging to get contraceptives. And I'm going to talk about that more. There's 19 million women who are in need of help accessing contraception. Of those 19 million, 1.2 live in a county without a single health center offering a full range of contraceptive methods. More than 1 million women don't live in a county with a single clinic offering them a wide range of birth control methods. For all of these women, getting contraception means they have to find a babysitter, take time off work, travel long distances, and spend money to seek out their preferred method of birth control. So this idea that, oh, just go on birth control. So think about that. If your clinic is only offering one method of birth control, the pill, let's say. I've told this story before. I could not go on the pill. I was on it until my early 20s, and then all of a sudden, I just was getting debilitating migraines. 3 days. No matter what, they lasted 3 days, and there was nothing at the time I could do to get rid of them. I had a job. I was going to college. I literally had to plow through 3 days. I couldn't afford to stay in bed of migraines, and it took me a while to realize it was the pill. So I couldn't be on the pill. So if I am in one of those counties, probably a red state, that doesn't have a clinic with multiple sources or a wide range of birth control options and they only offer the pill, what am I supposed to do? Suffer? suffer, a couple times a month with 3-day migraines? Women across the U.S. who aren't eligible for publicly funded contraception but still rely on the same health centers, whether for convenience, privacy reasons, or instances of reproductive coercion, women who have insurance may still seek contraception at health centers that primarily serve low-income women. So sometimes under these health plans or under an employer, they might only allow you to go to certain hospitals, certain clinics. I remember one time I had to go to the emergency room in San Francisco, and I happened to go to a Catholic hospital, not even realizing it. Or maybe I had to have a pap smear. I don't remember. And I asked, can I get the pill? And they're like, oh, no. This is a Catholic hospital. We can't give you the pill. How many women in the country have those same experiences? But I lived in San Francisco. I could just go to Planned Parenthood and get the pill. How many women who live in these counties can't do that? All they have are these institutions that either shame them or coerce them into abstinence. There's all this abstinence training. It's not that easy for some women to get access to birth control, to a wide range of birth control. There's also the shame and embarrassment that goes into getting birth control for some women. Again, they live in a very small community, very religious. Mormons, I think, maybe they live in a Mormon community or even a Christian community, and they know everybody, and there's just one drugstore in town, and that guy goes to the pharmacist goes to your church. How does a young woman or even a not so young woman navigate that embarrassment? But I'm thinking especially a young woman who hasn't grown into herself and is still ashamed, buying into a lot of the religious shame around women and sex and how, you're promiscuous, you're a whore if you want to be on birth control. There's a lot of that messaging still out there. So the shame and embarrassment put on women by other people is also something that prevents us from getting the birth control we want. And so, we're like, okay, well, I'll just stay abstinent. How does that work? We know abstinence never works. Never, ever, ever, ever. Study after study has shown abstinence does not work as an effective birth control method. It just increases women's shame, women's fear around their own body and their own sexuality. It's a mess. There are also accessibility problems for those with mobility challenges. If you can't get around very easily, if you're in a wheelchair, it can be a lot harder to gain access to birth control depending on where you live and how much availability, how many clinics there are. So accessibility itself is a huge hurdle for many women in getting birth control for many of the reasons that I just talked about. So let's talk about the next challenge is cost. Even if you do have access to a plethora of birth control options, the next thing is cost. Can you afford it? So this is me throughout much of my life. As a young working student, I didn't have health insurance. It wasn't that easy for me to take time off school and work and try to figure out, especially because I couldn't be on the pill. And let's talk about, I couldn't be on the pill. I didn't want to get pregnant. I asked many times to get my tubes tied, and they said no. So you want to talk about responsibility? When you're told no? Or when you live in a county that's anti-contraception and they want to shame women and so they strip away access to contraception, it's not that easy. They're stripping away our choices even before they stripped away our biggest choice, right? If there's no clinic in your county to help you get birth control, and if your doctor tells you, even 20 years old, I was like, I don't want kids, I don't want kids, I don't want kids. I want my tubes tied. Oh, sweetie, the patriarchal, patronizing. Oh, sweetie, you're going to change your mind. You're going to meet the right guy and you're going to change your mind. 54 years old, I never changed my mind. And because I was told no, I had to have abortion. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I had more than one. I couldn't be on the pill. The IUD didn't work for me. And they refused. I tried. That's 3 or 4 different methods that I tried that failed me, and the system failed me. And it wasn't a birth control option. I tried, the withdrawal and Plan B, and what was the other one? The rhythm method. because that was what I was left with. Those were the options I was left with, and they failed me. It's going to be a whole other video, though. So let's talk about cost. Here's a fun fact. When Obamacare passed, the ACA passed, giving millions and millions of women access to free birth control, no copays, free birth control of their choosing, abortions plummeted. They plummeted. Let's talk about that. You give women free access to birth control, easier access to birth control, and abortions go down. And what does the Republican Party want to do? Repeal Obamacare. Take that away. What do some businesses like Hobby Lobby and other anti-choice religious organizations do? They want to say, I'm not paying for birth control. Again, you know, I can't stress this enough. When you look at the facts, you know that repealing Roe v. Wade is not about saving lives. It's not about reducing abortions. It's about control. If we gave every woman of reproductive age in the United States free birth control of her choosing, we would have fewer abortions. But no. Every chance the Republican Party gets, they strip those rights away. They strip that money away. We'd rather pay for wars. We'd rather give big businesses tax cuts they don't need. So that's a fact. So 61.4 million women got access to free birth control under the ACA. Study after study shows that when the cost is removed as a barrier, women are more likely to use their preferred choice, their preferred method of birth control, and there are far fewer abortions. Let me say that again. Studies show that when the cost is removed as a barrier for birth control, more women use the birth control method that works best for them, and abortions go down. So why aren't we passing legislation pro-life, pro-anti-choice? Actually, I'm calling them anti-choice people. Why aren't you putting all your energy into passing legislation to make sure women get access to birth control? And especially, you want to talk about cost being a barrier. Cost is especially a barrier, of course, for low-income women, women of color, Black women, Hispanic women, Indigenous women. Cost is especially a barrier for them for getting access to contraception. And not every form of birth control is right for every woman. Women use about 3 different methods over the course of their lives. Remember the sponge? How many of you used? I used the sponge for a long time, and then they took it off the market. You know, I mean, so it's not like I didn't try. It's not like I was like, oh, you know, well, okay, let's just go have sex, and oh, if I get pregnant, I'll just go have an abortion. The people who think that are so wrong on so many levels. But so women use about 3 different methods of birth control over their lives. I've probably, now that I'm thinking about it, I've probably used at least 6, maybe more. And about 1/3 of women have used more than 5 methods of birth control. So that's more along the lines of what I have done. So about 1/3 of women have used more than 5 methods of birth control throughout their lives. Compare that to men. All of the energy and effort and trial and tribulation and the things that we do to our body, putting hormones into our bodies that do affect us, you know, whether you want to admit it or not. Anybody ever had an IUD put in? It's freaking painful. All the other ways that we try to prevent pregnancy, men have 1. Think about that. Think about all of the science, all of the medical attention and money that has gone into women, making it a woman's responsibility. There is only 1 or 2, if you want to count vasectomy, methods of birth control for men. A condom. And how many of you, especially those who dated a lot and weren't necessarily in relationships their whole lives. I dated a lot. How many of you have been with men who refused or cried or whined or bullied you into not wearing a condom? I want to hear. Do hashtag no condom if you have been bullied by a man to not use a condom. And now I did that video last night. All of a sudden, men are rushing to get vasectomies. All of a sudden. Wow. Wow. Let's talk about another thing about birth control. No matter how diligent you are, how responsible you are, you've been on birth control your whole life, maybe you even use a couple forms of birth control fails. I got some numbers for you. You want to hear these numbers? Failure rates for hormone-based or women's birth control methods can be as high as 7%. You want to know how many pregnancies that is? 5 million unwanted pregnancies. Birth control for women has a failure rate of up to 7%, causing more than 5 million unwanted pregnancies. So these people who want to shame us for being loose, irresponsible, unthinking, uncaring baby murderers because we go out and we get abortions like we, buy a new pair of jeans. What do you say to those women who have done everything right and they still end up pregnant because birth control is not foolproof? Condoms, 12% failure rate. Condoms have a 12% failure rate. So for those of us who were not be able to be on the pill, the IUD didn't work, and I was refused a tubal ligation by more than one doctor, condoms have a 12% failure rate, which is almost double the amount of unwanted pregnancies. So what would that be? 5, 10, probably like 7 million unwanted pregnancies from condoms. Oh, it's just personal responsibility. You're just not taking enough responsibility. You're careless. Really? How is that careless? And because my birth control fails, even though I have done everything in all the due diligence to not get pregnant, I have to be punished with carrying an embryo and that will become a baby and raising that baby that I don't want. By the way, let's talk about adoption versus abortion. I know women who've had abortions. I know women who've put their kids up for adoption. I'm going to tell you, the trauma from adoption is far worse than the trauma from abortion. The women I know who have given up their kids for adoption have to go through their entire lives wondering, did their kid end up in a good home? And I think worse is my kid thinks I didn't want them. I gave my kid away, and now my kid has to live with that thought that mom didn't want me, so she gave me away. That guilt eats at women for their whole lives, as opposed to aborting an embryo that didn't have to feel like mom abandoned me, that didn't have to feel like, why didn't my mom want me, or to potentially end up in a home where they were neglected or beat or abused or sexually assaulted. Let me say that again. The women I know who have given up their babies for adoption have far more guilt and bad feelings than the women. I don't know. I mean, I don't know a single woman who regrets having an abortion. I do know, I think almost every woman I know regrets in some way giving their kid up for adoption. That's a fact. I'd like to hear your experience. Leave your experience below. So with all of this information, all the data that I have given you so far, and I'm going to put my resources in the video description below. There's some pretty interesting resources you might want to read up on. It's pretty fascinating data. Nearly half of all pregnancies in the United States are unintended. Half of all pregnancies, and considering that the amount of abortions aren't half that, most women do end up deciding that they're going to keep their baby. 22% of women at risk of unplanned pregnancy say they'd do another form of birth control if they could afford it. Again, cost is a barrier to the best birth control for women to take control of their lives. And instead of passing legislation to ensure every woman has the best form of birth control for her, we're cutting funding, we're taking away clinics, and instead we'd rather pass legislation controlling her. Think about that. I hope those of you who are on the other side of this will take a moment right now to think about that. Think that through. If it were about saving lives, because women's lives matter too, and like I said in other videos, this reversal of Roe v. Wade is going to cause a lot of women to die, especially women of color, Indigenous women, Black women, Hispanic women. So if you really care about life, why not give women the tools they need to prevent pregnancy to begin with? Why not? Why aren't you marching? Why aren't you writing? Why aren't you as loud about your desire for women to be able to not get pregnant in the first place as you are to take that right away from women once they do get pregnant? And again, women of color have a higher prevalence of not using their birth control method of choice because of the barrier of cost and the barrier of access. And federal policy actually influences access to birth control. Federal policy. So again, the government took our rights away. The government also influences access to birth control. Why is the government not focused on giving access to birth control? This isn't about life. It's about control. Federal policies like Title IX can expand or constrict access. So Title IX, in case you don't know, is the law or the bill or whatever that was passed that said that federal money to health care organizations cannot cover abortion. But they can, if the legislation is right, cover contraception. So if federal policies like Title IX can expand birth control access. But do they? So Title V is an abstinence program that ran from 1996, expired in 2009. They've received more than $50 million in federal funding annually. $50 million of federal funding went into abstinence programs that have been proven over and over again to not be effective. That $50 million could have gone into Title IX to provide birth control access to more women. And it wasn't. So what is abstinence really? It's a religious idea, right? It really is. It's a religious idea. And anti-birth control is also a religious idea. So we see religion's influence in U.S. policy, right? Title IX can't cover abortions, and rather than put Title IX money toward clinics to provide better access to birth control, we're going to create a Title V abstinence program, putting $50 million into abstinence programs instead of into giving women better birth control access. The FDA also influences access to birth control. For example, they have controlled who can access the morning after pill or Plan B, what age you have to be, where you can get it. Do you have to have parental consent? Is it going to be over the counter? Do you have to go to a doctor? And if you have to go to a doctor to get it, then of course it's going to be harder for some women to get. They have to take time off work, find babysitters, find transportation, pay for all of that. Have I shown you yet that, oh, women can just go on birth control? What a privileged point of view that is. White privilege point of view. Because I almost always hear that from white women. Almost always. That's white privilege. I mean, if you don't know what white privilege is, that's white privilege. To assume that everybody and anybody can just go get birth control because you have insurance, you have accessibility, and you can afford it. Not everybody can. Nice bubble to live in if you can get it. So there's a lot of data. Again, I urge you to take a look at the resources, the sources that I use for this video below. Birth control is not as easy as some of you want to believe it is. And I hope that this was able to show you the hurdles that many women in this country have to go through to get birth control. And if one method doesn't work for you, sometimes it's almost impossible to get another method that does work for you. And again, I'm living, breathing proof. I've been poor most of my life. I've been lucky enough to have access in most of the places that I lived, but cost was always an issue for me. And also, I'm one of these women who were not able to get a form of birth control that worked for me, that didn't make me sick, that my body was okay with. And again, I can't stress this enough. I was not able to get my preferred method of birth control, which was my tubes tied. I asked a couple of doctors. Nobody would do it. They said until I was 40. And as soon as, no, actually, when I was 40, I was married to a guy who had a vasectomy. So for my whole adult life, my birthday present to myself when I turned 40 was to go get my tubes tied. But because I was married to a guy with a vasectomy, that would have been hard to explain. So there you have it. That's my birth control myth. This idea that women are irresponsible and careless if they don't use birth control. I hope that this video has shattered that idea and shed some reality on the issue of birth control for millions and millions and millions of women in this country. And again, look at that bubble that you're living in if you think it's that easy for anybody to just go get birth control. That's not the reality for many American women. All right. Thanks for listening. Leave your thoughts below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.